Well, hello there, and welcome back to another episode of New Life in Italy. I'm your host, Samantha Wilson, and today's episode is about the conversation that happens before someone decides to move to Italy. The late-night Google searches, the Reddit rabbit holes, the mix of excitement and fear that creep in when a dream starts to feel real. Today, we're doing something just a little bit different. We're looking at the questions that people ask over and over again before they make the move to Italy. And more importantly, I'm going to answer them. We'll talk about the practical questions like, of course, visas and money and healthcare and what life is really like, but we're also going to uncover the question that people are actually asking underneath all those searches. Because after helping thousands of people move to Italy, I've realized something, that people think they're searching for information, and they're really searching for confidence. They're trying to answer one simple question: can I really do this? So if you're somewhere in between dreaming and planning, this episode is for you. My hope is that by the end of our time together, you'll not only have answers, you'll also have a clear understanding of what moving to Italy really looks like without all the noise and the misinformation that can make the process feel so overwhelming. Are you ready? Let's get started. I'm Samantha Wilson, and this is A New Life in Italy, a show for people who love Italy and are quietly trying to figure out what it would really take to build a life here. We talk honestly about the practical choices, the emotional shifts, and the parts of this journey that don't always get talked about, so that you can move forward feeling informed, grounded, and more confident. If you're somewhere between dreaming and doing, you are in exactly the right place. Now, let's get into today's show. Okay, before we jump into the questions themselves, I want to explain why I chose this episode. I spend a lot of time online. I'm on Instagram every day. I read the comments. I see the Facebook groups and follow the conversations on Reddit. I read the emails that come to our office even. I even read the questions that people ask in Substack or even our members. And after helping so many people make the move to Italy over the years, I have noticed something really quite interesting. The same questions come up over and over again. People ask about things like visas and healthcare, taxes, buying property. They ask about how much money they need. And on the surface, these seem like practical questions. And of course, they are important because if you're moving to Italy, you absolutely need those answers. But I've also come to realize that those aren't really the questions people are asking. They're the questions people are using to try and answer something a lot bigger. Because if the information itself was the hard part, most people would have made their decision already because information is out there. You can find visa requirements. You can read government websites. You can watch YouTube. You can chat GPT it. The challenge isn't finding information. The challenge is knowing what to do with it. And it's wondering whether you're making the right decision, whether you've overlooked something important, wondering whether you're the kind of person who can actually pull it off. Can you really leave everything behind? Do you have enough money? Will you make friends? Will you regret it? What if you get something wrong? Those are all very real questions. And the practical questions about visas and money and paperwork are simply the way our brains are trying to make uncertainty feel manageable. Because moving to another country isn't a logistical project, at least not at the start. It's actually an identity shift. And it's one of the biggest decisions that most people will ever make. And your brain is naturally looking for certainty before it lets you take that leap. So instead of simply answering a list of frequently asked questions today, I want to do something different. I want to walk you through the real decision-making journey that people go through before they move. I'll absolutely answer the practical questions along the way. In fact, I'll give you my honest answer to the ones that I hear most often. But I also want to explore what's underneath those questions. Because once you understand the pattern, once you realize what you're really trying to answer, everything will start to make a lot more sense. So let's dive into the first question. The very first thing that people ask is almost never the one that's actually on their mind. On the surface, it sounds like this. Can I move to Italy permanently? Yes, of course you can, provided you qualify for a visa or you're European. Another question, is it possible to live in Italy as a foreigner? Absolutely. More than 5.5 million foreign nationals now call Italy home. They represent about 9% of the entire country's population, and that number continues to grow. Or you ask, do people actually move to Italy successfully? Well, every single day they do. Some people come for a year or two, and others retire here. Others raise families, fall in love, and never leave. Moving to Italy isn't unusual anymore. In fact, it's a well-traveled path. Those are the questions that you're typing into Google, but underneath those searches is a completely different question. Is this even something someone like me can do? And after speaking with thousands of people over the years, I don't think that they're really even asking about Italy. I think they're asking about themselves. They're wondering if they're too old or they've left it too long, if they have enough money, if they'll fit in, if they can really start over. In other words, they're asking, can I really build a new life in Italy? And that's a very different question. People aren't looking for a checklist just yet. They're looking for proof. They're looking for ordinary people who have done extraordinary things and discovered that it was possible. They're thinking, if someone like me did it, well, maybe I can do it too. And I think this is where so many people get stuck. Not because they don't know enough, because information doesn't create courage. At some point, every successful move begins with a decision, a quiet moment where you stop asking, could I? And start saying, I'm going to find out how. And once that happens, everything will shift. Now you're no longer dreaming, you're actually planning. So once you've decided that moving to Italy might actually be possible, your focus will start to shift. You're no longer asking if, but you're asking how. And this is when the searches that I see become a lot more specific. There's searches like, how hard is an Italian visa process really? Do visas actually get approved? How long does residency take? Why do some people get rejected and others sail through? These are exactly the right questions to ask, but they're also where people often become overwhelmed. One person says their visa was approved in 6 weeks, another 6 months. One consulate asked for a handful of documents, the other was a nightmare. So who's right? Well, the truth is they probably are all right. One of the biggest misconceptions about moving to Italy is that there's one process that everyone follows. There just isn't. Every visa has different requirements. Every consulate has its own way of interpreting those requirements. Every comune and every questura has its own way of doing things once you arrive. And that's why you'll find so many conflicting stories. People assume they're comparing the same process when in reality, they're often talking about completely different situations. So let me quickly answer those questions. How hard is the Italian visa process anyway? Well, it's procedural. Every visa has its own quirks and requirements, but if you genuinely qualify and can demonstrate it, and you have the right documentation, it's absolutely achievable. And question 2, do visas actually get approved? Yes, absolutely. Every single day, thousands of people successfully receive Italian visas every year. The process works. The key is applying for the visa that's right for you and submitting a completed, well-prepared application. Question, how long does residency take? 6 to 12 months. From the time that you land in Italy, from the time most of your paperwork is all finished, 6 to 12 months. Why do some people get rejected while others seem to sail through the process? Well, that's usually because they underestimate what they're applying for. This isn't just paperwork. It's an immigration process. You're not just have money, I want to move to Italy. You're asking another country to allow you to move and live in that country. The people who are successful are usually the ones who prepare thoroughly and understand that this is simply an immigration process. And over the years, I've learned that success isn't about finding one perfect answer. It's about understanding the process that applies to your situation. Yes, there will always be a little Italian unpredictability, and that's part of the experience. But once you stop asking what happened to someone else and start asking, how does this process work for me? Everything becomes clearer. And that's the question that will move you forward. And the next set of questions is all about money. Now, if you spent any time on Google about and searching about moving to Italy, you've probably searched at least one of these top questions. Number one, can I live in Italy on $2,000 a month? What is the cost of living in Italy for expats? What is the minimum income for an Italian visa? And is Italy cheaper than the US? These are all very important questions, and unlike some of the others we've talked about today, they deserve practical answers. So let's get to them. Number one, can you live in Italy on $2,000 a month? The answer is, depends. There's certainly parts of Italy where a single person could live quite comfortably on that amount. Like if you're living in a small town in Calabria or Molise, that's very different from living in the central Milan or Florence. Lifestyle matters just as much as location. Now, next question, what does it actually cost to live in Italy? Again, there isn't one answer. Housing is usually the biggest factor. After that comes utilities and groceries and transport. Some people spend a lot less in Italy than they did back in their home country, and others actually spend more because they're traveling, they're eating out, and they're enjoying life in ways that they never did before. Next question, what is the minimum income for the Italian visa? Well, that depends on the visa. The elective residence has one financial requirement, digital nomad has another, investor visa is completely different all again. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is reading about the financial requirements for one visa and assuming they apply to every visa. They just don't. And then the last question, is Italy cheaper than the US? In many ways, yes. Healthcare is often less expensive. Fresh food can be remarkably affordable. Property out of the major cities is often significantly cheaper, but some things do cost more, like energy, imported products, cars, and fuel. This often surprises people. Actually, I don't like the question, is Italy cheaper? I think the better question is, what kind of life do I want to build, and what will that life cost? Because that's where the real answer is. On the surface, all of these questions sound like they're about budgeting, but underneath them is something a lot deeper. They're actually asking, will I feel financially safe if I make this move? People aren't just trying to work out whether they can pay the bills. They're trying to imagine whether they'll sleep well at night, whether they'll still be able to travel, whether they'll be able to enjoy the lifestyle that they've worked so hard to create, or will their retirement plans last? That's why numbers on their own rarely give people peace of mind. Context does. Understanding your visa, choosing the right location, being realistic about your lifestyle, and planning before you move instead of after you arrive. Those are the things that create confidence, not simply knowing how much a cappuccino costs. Now let's get into the next set of questions, because once people feel comfortable with the financial side, their attention seems to shift again in these questions. They're no longer asking, can I afford to move to Italy? They're actually asking, what's my life going to look like once I get there? And the searches become much more practical, like, what is living in Italy really like? Do people speak English? Is Italy a good place to live long term? And how hard is it to integrate? So let's answer those first. What is living in Italy really like? Well, it's wonderful, of course, but it's still real life. Italy has an incredible quality of life. The food, the beauty, the culture, the slower pace, these are all very real. But so is grocery shopping and paying bills and dealing with bureaucracy and waiting in line at the post office. You're not moving to a postcard. You're moving into a new life. Now, do people speak English? Yes. In larger cities and smaller towns, probably much less, if not at all. And can you move to Italy without speaking Italian? Sure, you can. But will your life become better and richer and easier and more connected if you learn the language? Yeah, without question. Is Italy a good place to live long-term? For many people, yes, it is. I've seen clients arrive thinking they'd stay for just a year and they're still here 10 or 15 years later. Others realize it's not quite what they expected and they decide to go home. Both are perfectly okay because success isn't measured by how long you stay. It's measured by whether you built the life that you wanted. Now, how hard is it to integrate? Well, it takes time. You're learning a language, a culture, a different way of doing life. Friendships don't happen overnight, but they do happen. And here's what I think people are actually asking in those set of questions. They're not really asking if Italians speak English. They're asking, will I be lonely? And they're not really asking what life is like in Italy. They're asking, will I be happy there? Nor are they asking, how hard is it to integrate? They're actually asking, will I ever feel like I belong? And those are real questions, because once you've figured out the visa and the finances, what matters most isn't whether you can live in Italy, it's whether Italy can become your home. And that's a question that doesn't get answered by Google. It gets answered by living. Now, the next stage is kind of fascinating because it's where people stop looking for reasons to move and start looking for reasons not to. This is where Reddit suddenly becomes your best friend, or actually your worst enemy. The search always changes. So the questions then are, what are the biggest problems living in Italy can be for an expat? Is Italian bureaucracy really that bad? Is healthcare in Italy good for a foreigner? What are the tax surprises that nobody tells you about? Now let's get to those questions first. Are there challenges to living in Italy? Absolutely there are. Italian bureaucracy is very frustrating. Things often take longer than you expect. Of course, rules can sometimes be interpreted differently depending on where you are. Patience is a virtue here. Is healthcare good? In my experience, yes, it is good. Italy has an excellent healthcare system, although learning how to access it as a new resident can be very frustrating, and it does take time. Like every country, there are regional differences, so waiting times and services are a little bit different, but overall, it's one of the reasons a lot of people choose to build a long-term life here. And another question, are there tax surprises? Well, there can be if you don't plan ahead. Your tax residency, where your income comes from, which tax regime you qualify for, all make and can make a significant difference. The surprise usually isn't in the tax itself. It's that people didn't understand the rules before they moved. But here's actually what I think people are asking when they search all of these questions. They're not really asking if bureaucracy is frustrating. They're asking, am I about to make a huge mistake? They're not really asking about healthcare. They're actually asking, will I be okay if something happens to me? And they're not asking about taxes. They're asking, could this decision hurt me financially? Those are completely reasonable questions. In fact, I'd be more worried if you weren't asking them, because this stage isn't about negativity. It's about protection. Your brain is stress testing one of the biggest decisions that you will ever make, and that's healthy. The danger comes when you never leave this stage, when you spend months or even years reading horror stories online, convincing yourself of every worst case scenario and that it's going to happen to you. So please remember this. People rarely go online to post everything was perfect and exactly as expected. They only post when something goes wrong. So don't mistake the loudest stories for the most common stories. Just do your research, understand the risks, prepare well, and then make your decision based on facts and not fear. Now, after all the dreaming and the research and the budgeting and the stress testing, something will change. And the questions start to show this because they become very specific. Questions like, what is the best visa for retiring? What are the requirements for the digital nomad? Is the investor visa worth it? Do I qualify for the elective residence? And by this stage, people aren't just curious, they're actually ready to make a decision. So let's quickly answer those. What's the best visa for retirement? Well, the elective residency visa is probably the best one if you have sufficient passive income. And the digital nomad visa is an excellent option if you work remotely for clients or are employed outside of Italy. And of course, that you're a professional and you can meet the income requirements. And is the investor visa worth it? For the right person? Absolutely. In fact, if you're looking for speed or flexibility and a pathway that doesn't rely on passive income and you still want to work, it can be one of the best options available. So which visa should you choose? Well, that's actually the wrong question. Because what you should really be asking isn't what visa is best. You should be asking, which life am I trying to build? Do you want to retire and slow down, or do you want to keep building your career? Do you want total freedom to do what you want? Do you want to raise your kids here? Every one of those may lead to a different visa. The visa isn't the destination. It's simply the bridge that gets you there. And I think that's one of the biggest mind shifts people can make. Don't start with the visa, start with the life. Once you're closer on the life that you want to build, the right visa usually becomes a lot easier to identify because you're no longer choosing between visa categories. You're actually choosing the future that you want to create in Italy. Now, if you step back and look at everything that we've talked about today, something really interesting appears. People think they're asking about visas or taxes or healthcare, but underneath all of those questions, it's something much more human. Can I really do this? Will it work for me? Will I be financially secure? Will I find my place? And am I making the right decision? And ultimately, can I build a life that feels even better than the one I have today? And that's the real question, isn't it? And once you understand that, everything will start to make more sense, because the goal isn't to answer every question all at once. It's to answer the right question at the right time, one step, one decision, one layer at a time. So if you're somewhere in this process today, I'd encourage you to ask yourself one simple question: which stage am I actually in? Not what you think you're in, but the stage you're in. Because once you know that, you know what your next step is. And that's how big life changes happen. One confident decision after another. Now, if today's episode resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. Which of these questions have you been asking yourself? Or maybe there's a question that I didn't cover today. Send us an email, leave a comment, or reach out on social media. I read a lot more of your messages than you probably realize, and they often inspire future episodes just like this one, because chances are, if you're asking that question, thousands of other people are wondering exactly the same thing. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you of something. You don't need all of the answers right now. You just need the right questions and the space to think clearly. If this episode helped you feel more grounded or less alone, that's exactly why the show exists. You can find all of the links and the resources that I mentioned in today's episode in the show notes. And if you want to go deeper, head over to smartmoveitaly.com for more ways that we can help you make your move to Italy a whole lot easier. And if you're enjoying the show, subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with someone that is also dreaming about Italy helps more than you know. Thanks again for spending time with me. I will see you next week. Ciao for now. Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.